Hello and welcome to my thoughts on Battlefield 1. So it's about time I did this video. I watched the trailer, I watched the premiere event, I watched a bunch of YouTube videos, and I've basically gone through all the information that I can find, and I've got some thoughts on it. So first of all, we're going to say that the trailer looks really good. In-engine can mean a lot of things. They can do post-processing work on it. It could be running on a beastly PC with everything turned up to max in the engine. But it's a Frostbite game. Frostbite games look really good when they come out. Look at Star Wars Battlefront and the graphics in that compared to the graphics in Battlefield 4. And we can imagine that the Battlefield 1 graphics on a big PC with everything turned up are going to look pretty much like the trailer. The other thing we know from the trailer, of course, is that it's a World War I setting. This doesn't make me jump for joy. In fact, it shouldn't make a lot of people jump for joy. Because when Jack Frags did a survey before we knew what Battlefield 5 was going to be, he asked, what setting would you like to see it in? And World War I scored 7%. It was the least wanted setting out of all of them, and that included a futuristic battlefield. So, why is World War I suddenly so popular after the launch of the trailer? Well, it's got a lot to do with the launch the week before of the Call of Duty trailer, where Call of Duty has gone into space. I think a lot of people were just reacting to the fact that Battlefield 1 is going to be a traditional Battlefield game with planes and tanks and soldiers on the ground. So why do I have doubts about the World War I setting? Well, it's simply because we haven't seen any gameplay. We haven't seen how the classes are going to be balanced, and we haven't seen how the vehicles are going to be balanced. Because in World War I there was no weapon balance. In a modern era you can be pretty sure that all assault rifles are going to do the job they were intended for. But in World War I, when you look at things like submachine guns, only the Germans had a practical submachine gun, and that was at the very end of the war. You can actually see this problem in the trailer and in their publicity pictures, because their Harlem Hellfighter is using a German MP-18 submachine gun and a German Mauser machine pistol. Basically, only the Germans and Italians actually had any form of submachine gun in World War I, and they pretty much dominated the machine pistols as well. The British didn't adopt the Sten gun until World War II, and the Thompson submachine gun, which was known as the Annihilator at the time, didn't really come into any form of production until after World War I. Instead of submachine guns, the British and the Americans were using shotguns in trench warfare, and basically the Germans thought this was really unsporting and tried to get them banned. So the Germans wouldn't use shotguns, but the British and Americans couldn't use submachine guns because they didn't have any. So how do you balance that in multiplayer? Do you just ignore what countries have what guns, kind of like they do in Battlefield 4, but then what's the point of having a World War I setting because you're not following World War I? It's a similar story when we come to the vehicles. How are they going to handle tanks? So the British developed tanks, or land ships, quite early on into World War I, and actually deployed them in really large numbers. So in some battles you'd get 100 tanks steaming across the battlefield. However, the Germans only built 20 tanks over the entire course of the war, and they were so bad that when the British captured them, they scrapped them because they were completely useless. In fact, the German army used more British tanks than they did German tanks. The French developed their own smaller, more mobile tanks with a movable turret, and they developed those in large numbers as well. So the Allies had large lumbering tanks that the British made and the small, faster tanks that the French made, whereas the Germans didn't have any. And here's my problem with what we've seen in the trailer. We've seen Germans using British weapons, we've seen the British using German weapons, we've seen the Americans using German weapons. Basically, it would appear that they're not sticking to World War I, they're just letting anybody use any weapon that they happen to want in their loadout. Now, I could be wrong about this because we haven't seen any gameplay, but that's my problem with all the hype over the Battlefield 1 trailer. We haven't seen any gameplay. There's so much we don't know. We've seen some really impressive shots of the Dreadnought out at sea firing its main cannons, and we've seen the armoured train running down the tracks, and we've seen what isn't actually a Zeppelin in World War I but an airship going over the top, and all they make me think about is the AC-130 in Battlefield 4. Are these things in the multiplayer? How is a soldier on the ground supposed to stop them? Or is this just another case that it's got to be a fighter aircraft or one of the bombers? Is there a way to actually take these things out if you're just a soldier? Or is it going to be another way for you to die to something that you can't do anything about? And for me, those are enough concerns to make me think, yes, the Battlefield 1 trailer looks really nice, but no, I am not going to jump on the hype wagon. The Star Wars Battlefront trailer looked really nice, but the game turned out to be very weak. Battlefield 4 trailers looked really nice, but there were massive balance problems when the game came out, and there were massive technical issues when the game came out. So until we see some proper multiplayer gameplay and we get hands-on with the classes and the vehicle balance, I am not jumping onto the Battlefield 1 hype train. I can see that World War 1 could be really good for the single player campaign, but I can also see some massive balance problems with the multiplayer unless they just completely fudge the history of World War 1 and have everybody using everything. So at the moment, I'm just not that convinced. Thanks for watching.